Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A brother asked a question that in Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the conversation of Nooh alayhi salam with his son. While Nooh alayhi salam was riding his ship and the son was swimming in the flood water. Did that communication involve any kind of technology? Was Nooh alayhi salam and his son communicating via some state-of-the-art technology that they were able to communicate that effectively in the flood? While it was raining, the water was gushing, the waves were high, and the boat was sailing. How were they communicating? Now let me take you to one of the surahs in the Quran, which is Surah Hud, and I want you to look at ayahs number 41, 42, and 43. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah number 41, وَقَالَ ارْكَبُوا فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرَاهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا إِنَّ رَبِّي لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Nuh alayhi salam said, board it in the name of Allah, it will sail and cast anchor. Surely my Lord is all forgiving, most merciful. So while he starts to sail, وَهِيَ تَجْرِي بِهِمْ فِي مَوْجٍ كَالْجِبَالِ, and so the ark sailed with them through waves like mountains. And in those waves, Nuh alayhi salam spotted his son. What was the name of the son? Quran doesn't say anything about it, but some mufassirun through Israeliyat say that his name was Kin'an. Allahu a'lamu bis-sawab. وَنَادَى نُوحُ ابْنَهُ وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزِلٍ. And Nuh alayhi salam called out to his son, who stood apart, يا بني اركب معنا ولا تكن مع الكافرين. Oh my dear son, oh my dear son, come aboard with us and do not be with the disbelievers. And the son's reply is also reported in the Quran in ayah 43 of Surah Hud. قال, and the son said, سآوي إلى جبل يعصمني من الماء. I will take refuge on a mountain which will protect me from the water. And Nuh alayhi salam said, قال لا عاصم اليوم من أمر الله إلا من رحم. Nuh alayhi salam said, today no one is protected from Allah's decree except those to whom He shows mercy. And while they were having this conversation, وَحَالَ بَيْنَهُمَا الْمَوْجُ, and the waves came between them, فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُغْرَقِينَ. And when the waves settled down, his son was among the drowned. So this communication and this conversation, a brother asked, when this conversation took place, what kind of technology were they using and how were they communicating? Well, the text in the Quran does not explicitly mention any special technology or method of communication. Instead, several interpretations can help clarify the scenario. Number one, it must be a natural voice, because Nuh alayhi salam might have used his voice to call out to his son. And during storms or high tide, sounds can carry over water under certain conditions, especially if the ark was not too far away. Human voices can sometimes travel great distances over water due to the lack of obstruction. Another response to this is that it was a divine assistance, as in the Islamic view, prophets were often granted abilities or situations facilitated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to convey their messages effectively. It is possible that Allah enabled Nuh alayhi salam's voice to reach his son clearly despite the turbulent condition, and this would align with the miraculous nature of the flood event itself as described in Quran. While some people speculate about the use of advanced lost technologies in ancient times, similar to ideas popularized by alternative history theories, there is no evidence within Islamic tradition or mainstream archaeology to support such claims. The Quranic account emphasizes faith divine intervention and human responsibility rather than technological explanation. So in the story of Nuh alayhi salam communicating with his son during the flood, as described in the Quran, offers profound lessons and invites exploration from various perspectives, which includes theological, scientific, and historical. So if you're looking at theological explanations, so the story is deeply symbolic in Islamic tradition, emphasizing obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, divine justice, and the consequences of rejecting guidance. Many Muslim scholars believe the communication between Nuh alayhi salam and his son during the high tides was facilitated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prophets were often aided in miraculous ways when fulfilling their missions. This would not require any advanced technologies or unnatural explanation. And Nuh alayhi salam's son refusing to board the ark symbolizes humanity's tendency to reject the truth. And if we look at it from the scientific perspective, if we look at the scenario scientifically, the ability of sound to travel over water could explain how Nuh alayhi salam spoke to his son. So over open water, sound can travel effectively due to lack of physical barriers. In turbulent conditions, however, sound waves might be scattered or absorbed, but they can still reach short distances. So the narrative suggests the sun was close enough for Nuh alayhi salam's words to reach him. For instance, as we saw in the Quran, the words like mountains as describing the tides, this imagery may reflect proximity, as Nuh alayhi salam could still visually spot and call to his son. And high tides and storm conditions can amplify or disrupt sound depending on the wind direction and environmental factors. So modern science has observed that people shouting over the roar of water, such as in flood rescues, can sometimes make themselves heard. And as far as the historical context is concerned, the flood story appears in several religious traditions, including the Quran, the Bible, and also the ancient Mesopotamian myth like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, for those of you who are interested in we talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, we can certainly talk about that in detail. So Nuh alayhi salam, as described in the Quran, was a wise and resourceful leader who spent years warning his people. And many ancient narratives use the flood to highlight moral, societal, and divine lessons rather than precise technological or historical details. And some alternative theories, inspired by speculative works like those of Zacharias Sitchin that we talked about last time, or proponents of ancient advanced civilization, suggest lost technologies might explain events like Noah's communication. However, such claims lack evidence. And proponents argue that ancient societies might have possessed forgotten communication tools, possibly from extraterrestrial or advanced human origins. But no archaeological or historical findings suggest that such technologies existed during Noah's time. The Quran does not mention any extraordinary devices, focusing instead on spiritual and moral elements. So the story underscores that spiritual salvation is more significant than physical survival. Noah's son trusted his intellect that I will take refuge on a mountain rather than Allah's decree. And Nuh alayhi salam calling to his son, even as the floodwater rose, highlights a prophet's compassion and determination to save others. And the ark itself symbolizes reliance on Allah, while the drowning represents the futility of rejecting divine guidance. So, how do we sum it all together? The communication between Nuh alayhi salam and his son during the flood can be explained as a combination of natural means, that his voice over water, divine facilitation added by Allah's will, and symbolic storytelling to convey spiritual truths. Ultimately, the emphasis of the story in the Quran is on the moral lessons, the importance of faith, the consequences of arrogance, and the responsibility of prophets to guide their people, even in the face of rejection. Well, I hope that answers your question in quite detail, and inshallah we will continue talking about some more stories from Sumerians, and we also will talk about some alternative historical aspects. As we talked about Zachariah Sitchin's 12th planet view of Sumerians, we're going to be looking at some more alternative theories as those questions have come to me from you. So when you guys are sending all these questions my way, I expect you guys are also watching the videos on the channel. So inshallah, till next time, assalamu alaikum.